Good morning. Sorry to keep you waiting. We just wanted to wait for the participants to join. My name is Maurice Crespi. I'm the managing partner of Schindler's Attorneys. Schindler's a co-founder of COBRA. Thanks for joining today. We joined today with a group of panelists. Peter Gordon of Engaged Business Turnaround, also a COBRA founding partner. Ian Fleming of Engaged, Roger Hitchcock of the CIDAR Group. He's a senior partner there, and he'll be giving us a presentation today. He'll be dealing more with a strategic look at a business rescue as opposed to a technical legal look. And on a technical analysis, and those Q&A sessions, we still have them on a weekly basis. We're having one on Monday. So if you want to go through the law and have questions in relation to the law, procedure, how the business plan works, that would be for Monday. Today, we're going to have a look at the future, strategy, basically a high-level strategic look at where companies can go. And that's going to be Roger's presentation today. Then I'm joined by Gary. He's from Schindler's Attorneys. Dean Wright, my partner, also at Schindler's. Emma Marseille of the IQ Business Group. Dominique Lloyd, also from Schindler's. And Artisha from the IQ Business Group. So I'm going to hand over to Roger. Before I do, I just want to explain briefly how this would work. So if a business goes into business rescue, and COBRA is not about business rescue, COBRA is about avoiding business rescue. If a business goes into business rescue, there has to be a plan, okay? So what COBRA is about is the legal aspect, then the rescue aspect where Engage comes in, and Engage assists in the turnaround, they're specialists at that. And then what we have is we have the business rescue plan that has to be prepared in consultation with employees and creditors, and then adopted. Now, it's at that point where the thinking that you're about to hear today comes in. That's where it plugs in. So, Roger, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks so much, and yeah, welcome everybody, welcome panelists, and welcome to everybody listening. I'm going to be just sharing my screen and picking up on what Maurice has said, and it's essentially trying to give you some handles on what to think about during this time. And I suppose it's also good that it's a Friday, although some of us lose track of the weeks, but maybe some things to think about and ponder about and really work out over the weekend. Calling this webinar Rediscovering Your True North, because one of the metaphors that we've often used in our business is this is a bit like a blizzard that has hit the world. And a blizzard is overwhelming. It's something that suddenly we lose sight of our objective. And so what has, I believe, happened over the last 6 to 8 weeks is a lot of us have focused on the immediate. We focused on what we can control in the immediate. And the time is now to start thinking and lifting our eyes almost as the blizzard starts changing. I think there's still a way to go. But I think as we start thinking into the future, we need to start unpacking the way forward. What we do at CIDAR is we work effectively in the boardroom. We essentially work with decision makers and directors, senior leadership teams, and a big part of that right now is thinking strategically. One of the reasons we use the blizzard metaphor is that the name CIDAR comes from the name for the lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition. And so the board of a company, the decision makers of the companies are the ones who need to be stepping up and saying, well, we believe that there is a way forward. And part of the business rescue process, as Maurice has said, is to think structurally and strategically through the plan that lies ahead. Powerful quote that I think is really important, and we see the two themes emerging at the moment is looking further ahead and the theme of leadership. And we're obviously watching almost in interest, and the word that we were talking about a bit earlier was the word that seems to be summing up where things are at the moment is this word surreal. But it's almost as if we're seeing multiple leadership case studies unfold simultaneously around the world. We are part of one. here in South Africa, where we're seeing the challenge around leadership and lots of questions. But the key thing about leadership is what Hesburgh said when he said the very essence of leadership is that you have a vision. The key point of the word director is that a director should know where they're directing their people to and their companies to. And obviously going through the world is going to need rescuing. Businesses are going to need technical rescuing. But also, as Marisa said, actually this process is about trying to get us to see further and to really blow that certain trumpet in your own businesses. And so it's this concept of rediscovering your true north. We can't see the stars anymore. We can't see the direction anymore, but we have to start looking for markers. And so the question I'm going to give you some handles around answering today is, where do we start and what should we do? Because a lot of the strategic thinking, and a lot of us, I'm sure, as we did earlier this year, we had a strategy breakaway in January. Little did we know that within 6 to 8 weeks, a lot of the things we'd spoken about then, we were talking 2030. Right now, we're battling to see 2021. And so all of us have to be saying, where do we start and what do we actually think about as our companies go through this? And so what I'd like to do in the roadmap, and panelists, you're also welcome to jump in and chip in as we go, because I think the more we can learn from one another during this time. And as I said, I think it's powerful that we're going into a weekend. There's some time over the weekend to take a break and to step back from your businesses and think strategically. And so I want to give you some foundations. There's 2 or 3 concepts, quite conceptual, that I want to take you through in terms of what we're going through now as a world and as a country and as cities and as companies and as even families, but then also to give you some idea of some tools and elements in rediscovering your true north. How does one then start putting things together? What are some tools that one could actually use? As we go as well, please drop your questions into the Q&A box and we'll pick up on those. And we will be able to engage around those as we go. One of the most important things I believe that we're needing to do at this time is, obviously, in a strategic process, we often have a review cycle and we try to renew the way forward. We look back, learn, we look forward, and we try to renew what we're doing. But I think the key thing we need to be thinking about in this time, because there are so many question marks, is to really activate our imaginations. And I call it a process of reimagining. Is that as we go through the challenges, we need to start really thinking about the future in a completely different way, because there are some things, as we all know, that may go back to the way they've almost been. And there's always momentum and there's always trends that I think in 6, 9, 12 months' time will remain there. But there are going to be some significant challenges and changes in not only the way each of our businesses works, but actually the way the world works. Just a question that I saw answered this morning in an article was, when are we going to be able to travel again? My life has changed significantly because I was traveling every single month for the last 2 to 3 years to Kenya and Ghana and multiple countries. And I'm now spending most of my time able to engage in those countries, but online. And so it's a completely different skill set. And so every one of us has to reimagine how we do it going forward. And so what I want to do is look at what the essence of strategy is and understanding how does some of these words that we use, so scenario thinking, and I think it's a time where it's very difficult for us to determine one thing that is happening. But we need to start identifying what are the trends that are happening around us and what could those lead to in the future, building some scenarios. A concept I call liminality, which is transition, and we'll talk through that. And then also, what are we trying to do in our businesses? We're trying to build the right variety. But it starts by saying, if we think about what strategy is actually, and in the time we're in, we need to properly diagnose what's going on. And so the essence of strategic thinking starts with diagnosis. What that means essentially is what is really going on here. And obviously, as we see the pandemic unfold and unroll and become more and more challenging around the world, we can we can diagnose to some extent that, we can see some of those trends. But here we're talking about our businesses. We need to start asking the question, so we are facing challenges. For what are the real reasons we're facing challenges? And I know some of them are fairly obvious, because payments are not being made, staff are working from home, but it's really important to diagnose as deeply as possible in this time, so that we get to the real reasons. A lot of businesses we've seen are that they were already challenged before this crisis. An example that's obvious to a lot of us is SAA. SAA is was in massive trouble, and this pandemic put the last nail in the coffin almost. But there are a lot of our businesses have been battling because our economy hasn't been that great for a long time. And so we've got to ask the question, what of what we're going through now is because of this specific crisis, and what is fundamentally, has there been in our business which has been challenging? We've also then got to ask the question, where do we stand and how do we see it? So we'll look obviously into the future in terms of strategy, and we want to look at what lies ahead. But a critical thing is to say, where do we stand? What is our perspective and what is our position? A very good quote that I heard that summed it up. We often hear the quote, "We're all in the same boat." Well, the reality is we're not all in the same boat, because all of our businesses are different, all of our contexts are different, but we are going through the same storm. And so the storm is almost easier to diagnose than what's going on in our businesses. And so it's a time to really look at saying, what can we do? What is our perspective? Where can we unlock value? Where can we find advantage in this time? The airlines that have started transporting emergency equipment, the restaurants that are having to shift from sit down to delivery, the transport companies that are no longer driving people but are driving food. There are things that are happening that if we can understand what our position is, and by that I mean what are our capabilities, we can start to, thirdly, look at what coherent and compelling action can we actually take. What can we do that can really make a difference in this time? What can we do in our business? Because for each of us, there are actions we can actually take. Some of those are trimming down, some of those are possibly scaling up in areas, some of those are preparing for what we can anticipate in the future, some of those are pursuing opportunities that are emerging at this stage. And this is where I really suggest you start to look, and I'm sure you are, at sources of information that are making sense of this unrolling pandemic. I've seen more articles in the last week about the businesses that are actually doing well, that are benefiting from what's happening, that have either done it because they're repositioning themselves, or they've done it because they happened to be able to take advantage of something that is moving in their environment. And it essentially looks at saying, well, if we look ahead in our businesses and we think about, the second element is this concept of liminal thinking, and this word liminal is essentially it's the word for transition or threshold. And when we think of strategy, we often think of it in terms of targets and objectives. But during this time, I think we need to be thinking of it more of what transitions do we need to go through to get to the next. So looking ahead, and when I spell out some tools, instead of looking at a longer term vision, it's a case of saying, what do we need to transition into and through in the next 6 months in order to be successful in 12 months' time? It's not the target so much as moving into and out of a whole range of different transitions that are unfolding. And so a liminal space is this space of, it's the space of where the waves break on the sea. That's known as liminality, because, as I said, a limin is the word for threshold, and so liminal is transitional. And we're all in a transitional space at the moment. A pandemic is a transitional space, because regardless of what time frame we believe is accurate, and there are so many time frames going around, we need to recognize that we've got to get through this thing to get out on the other side. And it's really critical strategically to ask the question, what do we have to hold on to the strongest? What can we, if necessary, let go of in our business? What can we pursue? What can we not pursue? And that's this whole concept of transition. And a transition is important to think about, because it's about thinking, how do we go to it? How do we go through it? And how do we go from it? Because we don't want to get stuck in it. And I think this is the danger. So what I'm picking up is a lot of companies that have looked primarily at the present, which is understandable. So our viewpoint, our strategic time horizon has effectively gone to the immediate. And we've opened up, we've done things. Some of us have launched opportunities or launched initiatives about the immediate, which is absolutely understandable. But for them to be viable into the future, we then need to think, well, what do they need to go through so that something survives at the other end? And maybe it's a new opportunity. So our approach and preparation to each of these phases. So even thinking on a week by week basis. So we've now moved in South Africa to level 4. We understand the complications and the challenges. We have an idea of what level 3 could look like when it happens. We just don't know really the time frames. But we can start preparing for that in level 4. Now, what are the opportunities that will change in your business when that happens? Level 2, level 1, and recognizing that after that, there are some things that are going to be remaining, but some of the things, if we reorientate our business, we'll be able to find a way through it. The through is the action and accountability. The key challenge in business, and this is working in boardrooms, it's the distinction between the decision and the doing. And in our teams, and Maurice was saying before, we just checked in beforehand, and he was saying the amazing thing is that he's able to check in with a lot more of his teams than he has in the physical world, because it's just easier. It's a set of tools, and I know that's one of the challenges. Yet at the same time, we're saying it's a bit overwhelming because we can get roped into all of these different things. But the doing is often separate from the decision making. And so the way that we link deciding and doing is our policy framework. That's what a policy does. It essentially takes the decision into action, and it has to create accountability. And so a large part of strategic thinking right now is going to be, how do we link the action to the accountability? And then we need to look ahead. We need to keep looking ahead and asking ourselves the question, what will things look like on the other side? And I know the other side is a very kind of vague term, but when we start seeing some things return to some sense of normality, and what we're going to see, the challenges, we're going to see some businesses come to normality a bit quicker than other businesses. And so we need to be looking at what they're doing and learning for ourselves as well. So with those concepts in mind, I want to unpack some tools and some elements of the thinking process. And this is where it's helpful to have a pen and a paper, and these are being recorded, and you're welcome to go back and just review this process that I'm going to take you through. Starts by saying essentially, what does the future, or maybe not what does, because that's maybe a bit too definitive in the uncertainty, but what could the future look like? Given what we know, given what we've been through, given what we're seeing happening in other countries, and as I mentioned, we need to be looking at what scenarios are the closest to our scenario. As a couple of countries, some of the countries are a little bit ahead of us, some a little bit behind us. And we need to think about constructing a series of scenarios. And what that means is when we look at the future, we're asking ourselves, firstly, do we understand the purpose or promise or the why of our business? Because that hasn't fundamentally changed, or shouldn't have fundamentally changed given the crisis. If we can tie back to our fundamental reason for being, whether it's in construction or whether it's in fast food, whether it's in hospitality, and some of those sectors have been seriously challenged, there is a promise, there is a purpose underlying that. And if we can revisit that, and based on that, ask ourselves the question, well, what are the possibilities into the future? What do they look like? I know that one example early on in the crisis was a hotel group that approached the hospital group, this was in the UK, and said, your people need to work in the hospitals, but they shouldn't be going back to their homes. And so can we go into an agreement that the hospital staff will stay in the hotel, keep the workforce in the hotel going, lock them up as well so that create a bubble, and then keep at least the basics going so that the through, and that's the revisiting one's promise and looking at a possible future. Possibly another way to think about it right now, as I said, when in a crisis, we need to be thinking of multi-horizons. So it's not so much saying, what was our 2030 vision, but putting it down and saying, well, what does it look like? What does the 2024 look like? What does the 2022 look like? And then what does the 6-month picture look like in our business? And remember that scenarios aren't predictions of the future. And this is the challenge a lot of people have with strategic thinking. It's really difficult, and it's even more difficult when it's uncertain, but it's something we need to be doing, because it's only when we set a direction that we can test that direction as we move forward. And that's a critical part of strategic thinking. And so looking and saying, what are the horizons? What do the horizons in your business look like going forward? And I always link this back to one of the root words of governance. So as I said, we work in the boardroom. Directors work with governance, as do many senior leaders in organizations. And the word governance comes from the Greek word kubernetes, which means the captain or pilot of a ship. And so the one thing the captain of the ship has to look at all the time is the horizon, and have a clear view on the horizon. Where do we need to be to go over the horizon? And right now, obviously, our horizons are shortened, but we need to keep thinking into the future, because also that's how we'll motivate our people. We'll get people's buy-in, because right now, as things get more surreal, as things get more fatigued, it's really important for leadership to stand up and say, let's really think about where we want to go. We've then got to look at, where are we now? So we've got to revisit our current business model and part of strategic thinking. So we believe strongly that strategy isn't just about the future. It's about the future, it's about the present, and it's about how to move forward. It's a whole lot of things. But it's asking the question, given the scenarios that we're looking for, where does that leave us? Where do we stand in the present? And examining our key capabilities, key capacities, the things we can do, because all of us in our businesses have created value by combining, and very powerful tool to think about and to use is one called the Business Model Canvas. And this is available online. You can Google it. Very powerful to think about what has changed in our business. And from a rescue point of view, those of you going through a formal rescue process, part of the plan would be to examine your business and to say, based on, firstly, what value are you trying to deliver? Because the value side of the equation is the value proposition and the customer segment are linked. Some of our customer segments have changed significantly, all right? It's the relationship we have with the customers. Sometimes the relationship has changed. Hopefully the relationship, if it's good, is something we can lean upon and rely upon. Some of our businesses are seriously challenged in terms of the channels that they have available to us, because we can't walk into a mall anymore. And we know that there's challenges around online opening up and all of those kind of things. But we probably need to explore new channels, new relationships, and possibly even new customer segments. It could be even that the value proposition needs to be examined, because the things people are going to buy into the future will probably be different from the things, or should I say the reasons people buy in the future will probably be different from the reasons they buy in the present. And so that's, in a sense, the front end of the business model canvas looks at that side of things. And that's where we can specifically identify areas in the business that we're good at. And the phrase I'm using a lot is to say we need to go deeper than our products and services, because our products and services, our value propositions in that block are built by combining the back office of our business, which is obviously 4 elements, but thinking about who we partner with, what do we have available, thinking about what are the activities in the business, who are our people in the business. And so it's the combination of these elements here that create a value proposition. And what we need to be asking ourselves is, if we think about our value proposition, is there another way to recombine the elements of our business model? Are there activities that we're good at that can create something different in terms of value? Is there a different way to leverage our assets to generate income, or is there a different way to finance or to work with our assets and our asset base to either raise money, generate income, revenue, whatever? Are there other people we need to be partnering with? Look at our stakeholder map and say, are there relationships out there, maybe key clients you've had that you can partner with to deliver something else? to help them deliver, to them help you deliver? Are there key suppliers that actually you can leverage off in this time? What can your people do? I think it's a good opportunity to almost do a skills matrix of your people, because I know we employ people for a specific function, but most people can do more things than the function that we've employed them for. And so that could unlock, and I'm a great believer in getting everybody in the team into thinking about what the solutions are in this time. We're all going through it together. I've emphasized the need for leadership, but it's in this space of leadership that we can also get the buy-in of our people, because who knows, maybe the idea of that person that you've recruited in the last, maybe they started on the 1st of January and you don't really know them. Get them involved. Maybe they have an idea, a perspective, a position that can help you get either through or from the crisis that lies ahead. And then once we've done that, so between the space, as I mentioned, this is really looking at this, the future and the present. What we then need to do is we then need to look at the gap between the two, and it's exploring the pathways or transitions forward. And so what this looks like is, in essence, it looks like finding different options going forward. And I've put that arrow in. I haven't drawn a solid arrow because these are things, in especially a crisis, that in a sense we need to hold lightly. We're exploring pathways. It's almost like when we want to go on a journey, and we are looking at the different options of how to get there. I know some people, their challenges to how do you drive from Joburg to Cape Town without driving on a highway. In a sense, we need to be exploring those options because they look very different and they could change as time goes by. And it's in this pathway space, and so in this gap between the now and the not yet, in this space here, that we need to identify at the same time what are some of the key assumptions and expectations underlying what the pathways are. So what are we assuming? And the reason it's important to identify these is because when we start moving forward, so the key thing about what we need to do in this time is we do not want to get static and passive and stationary, because if you think about a blizzard, if a blizzard comes along, sure, there are times, but if the storm carries on, you still need to try to get out of it. You're going to lose the game if you just stop and simply hunker down. It's about moving forward. And one can only test the assumption when one is moving. You see, there's nothing stopping you saying, we're going to go in this direction as of the 8th of May, 2020. We believe this is our position. We're going to head off in this direction and try this. In a week's time, it may not be working. Nothing is stopping you as a leadership team saying, let's adjust it, let's amend it. But you can't test whether it's right or wrong unless you start moving. And so that's why our assumptions and expectations need to be spelt out, because every decision is based on a set of assumptions and expectations. The other thing that sits in the space between where we are now and where we want to be is there are some things that move us forward and some things that constrain us. So we call these accelerators and inhibitors. The reason I chose this picture of the sea is because those of you who surf know that if you go to a new beach, you don't just take your surfboard and run into the sea. The first thing you do is you look and you watch, because what you're looking for is you're looking for the currents, and the waves indicate the currents, the flow of the sea. You're looking for the different obstacles, because if you can find the right current, it'll take you to where you want to go. And in today's, I think one of the critical things today is to step back. I know it's difficult because sometimes we're roped up and wrapped into a whole lot of things, but it's stepping out of our businesses and saying, let's just look for a while, and allow our teams as well to just look for a while and see what is accelerating, what is inhibiting. Because there are massive news flows at the moment. Some, right through from those bordering on really strange to some really credible ones that we're needing to find and we're needing to look and see as we watch this unfolding case study. And so in all of our environments, there are things that move us forward, things that move us backwards. If you can find an accelerator in your context, in your environment, and as I said, that could be in your partnerships, it could be in your people, it could be in your skill set that the business has. Wherever you can find it, it's important to think about how do you move forward using that. The challenge as well for leadership, and this is where it becomes a bit challenging, is there are paradoxes in every decision that we make. there are the decisions. We saw it in the early Edcon example of the CEO of Edcon who had to, essentially they had to make a decision of who they pay. Do they pay their people or do they pay their suppliers? And that's a paradoxical situation. A crisis highlights the paradoxes. And we've got to find a way. It's not, a paradox is seldom resolved by going to either extreme. We've got to somehow find a way through the middle of a paradox. And I know that's not easy, but this is where a team approach, and I always emphasize when I talk to boards, is that leadership in organizations is a team sport. It's not a solo sport. We should be relying on one another to see things we don't see. We should be relying on one another to lift us up when we are flagging and we are fatigued, because it's together. And I know it's become a cliche, but it is true. We'll get through this thing together. We won't get through it on our own. And then lastly, to understand that in this environment, in this gap between where we are now and where we want to be, there are levers. There are things that we can leverage in our business or in the environment. It could be your people, again, it could be your technology. And remember what a lever does. A lever requires a small amount of effort to get a major move. Okay, and so this is, we talk a lot about saying, if you can find the right lever, and we all know that technology has been a very powerful lever. I think that rethinking about that is important to our people and our technology, because a lever obviously needs a pivot. It could be the skill set of our people. Maybe 40% of our people will end up working from home for the foreseeable future. But do they have the skill set to pivot the technology that is available to them? As you relook at your activities, assets, etc., what areas of leverage are there in your business that will leapfrog you into a period, into advantage, into the future, to get through this thing quickly? And so that's the gap. As I said, that's essentially, we've spoken about the gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And then what we need to do to tie it down to clear actions and accountabilities, we need to start looking for what I call waypoints and features. What must we look out for as we move forward? And this is where I emphasized at the beginning that I think it's less about targets and more about transitions. What's the proof that we're moving forward? What elements are we going to be working on in our business that we know that the one thing will lead to the next, will lead to the next thing? So those red blocks that I've drawn there are effectively a set of dependencies. So what does the project plan into the future actually look like? Where are we going to start? And right now, for some of your businesses that aren't able to open, what are you doing behind closed doors right now to prepare for whatever level of openness or opening up that you see? Those of your businesses that have started opening, what are you doing in the initial phase? What are the first steps? Because the danger with strategy is we often come up with too many ideas and we don't structure them in a project plan. So we have a lot of ideas and a lot of things, but this aspect is about how do we make sure that we take a systematic approach to the transitions we're going through. And as I said, this is identifying the key thresholds in our business. So maybe the threshold for your business is to reestablish or to rebuild your IT system. So interestingly, a bank in Ghana. So one of our clients is a bank in Ghana, and one of the bits of feedback was they saw their online platform triple in 30 days. And the problem is that put huge pressure on their security systems. And so they never anticipated. So they were in a slow build-up. They were in a slow cycle build-up, in a sense, over time. And it was great. It was part of their strategy. But that critical threshold they needed to get to very, very quickly was to up their security. We've all seen with Zoom the challenges that Zoom has had because of all of the different, gaps and in their business model, things they hadn't thought about. They hadn't thought about how do you scale, triple the number of people using the platform in 30 days, because it was inconceivable before. But when things happen, there are thresholds we need to go through. What do we need to go to? So what is the next step? So what does your 6 months look like? And what are the steps you need to take to get to 6 months? What does your 12 months look like? And what are the steps you need to take? And then how do you go through? And the reason I use waves, and it's the transitioning, the traversing, the climbing metaphors, is that this is often buffeted and challenged, and it's where we have to look for the right skills, the right equipment to actually get through it. And so it could be that we rearrange things in our business for a period of time. Maybe we write a policy framework for 6 months or 12 months, but that is what enables our business to move in the right direction. And then, lastly, and tying it down, it's absolutely critical. And I'd love to get questions as we wrap it up, is to really create accountability. So from the milestones and the measures, or from the waypoints that I spoke about, and the things we're looking out for in the environment, we've got to create milestones and measures that we can allocate to people, that we can give to people. What must we do? Where must we be? And as I said, what does the 1 month, 2 months, 6 month, 9 month picture in your business look like? What is the waypoint you're expecting to be passing at that point in time? And this is where critical, bringing this into the formal rescue process. A critical thing about a rescue process is once the plan is approved, it needs to be delivered. And if we haven't created the accountability, the milestones and measures in all parts of our business, looking at the different elements of our business. So are there milestones that link to the activities in the business? Are there asset-based milestones? Are there partnership milestones? If you're working with a partner, that you believe is going to get you through it and get you from this crisis into the future, when does the contract need to be finalized? When do you sign it? Because that's one of the dangers when we focus on the immediate, is we lose sight of the fact that sustainability is going to be in the systems and structures that we actually build going forward. And what do we need to achieve by when? So giving this to our team, and as I said, the distinction between doing and deciding is a critical thing here, because the people who do are not always the people who decide as we work with our teams. And what it looks like, obviously, it's building the systems and the processes and the people, and it's essentially looking. And there's a very powerful concept that I want to just touch on, which is stepping back into, in a sense, the conceptual space when we think about our businesses. And it's a law that relates to biology, but it's in terms of answering the question: what are we working with in our businesses? What are we trying to build in our businesses so that we can be sustainable? And it's a thing called the law of requisite variety. It's a guy called Ross Ashby, who was a biologist, and he worked with biological systems and how did they remain stable in an environment that changed. And right now we're going through massive changes, and so we need to ask about the stability, structure, fragility or not of our businesses right now. And so he spoke about the law of requisite variety, and variety being the number of possible states of a system. And he looked at it from two levels, in a sense. He said, firstly, that for a system to be stable, the number of states that its control mechanism is capable of attaining. So the control mechanism's variety. And so when I read this, as I said, I work in the boardroom. And so when I look at it, I say, well, that's for a business to be stable. The number of states that its board or leadership team is capable of attaining must be greater than or equal to the number of states in the system being controlled. And when we're looking at our teams, we need to ask the question, do we have in our teams the variety necessary to handle the crisis we're going through? If we do, how do we make the most use of it? If we don't, how do we get it? And this is where advisors are really, really important, is how do you find the people out there who can add variety to your team right now? And it's in this COBRA team. There are incredible resources that can be drawn upon that are standing ready to say, let's help your teams build the variety that you need. And then obviously into the long term, what does that look like? So for the system to be stable, the control mechanism needs to be have more variety in it than this number of states in the system being controlled. And the second layer is the layer of your business and the environment. So if a system is to be able to deal successfully with the diversity of challenges that its environment produces. So this isn't just the leadership team and the company, all right? This is the challenges that the environment throws at the company. And we're going through, as you know, one of the most challenging times in history. Times that we'll tell our grandchildren about, in a sense. But the system itself, so the business itself, obviously the leadership team needs to have it. The system itself needs to have, and I love this phrase, a repertoire of responses, which is at least as nuanced as the problems thrown up by the environment. And so when we think strategically, we need to be thinking viability and variety. As what are the areas of our business? Going back to the thinking around, the business model canvas. So what are the areas of our business that can provide us with, or do we need to build the variety necessary in our teams, in the way we structure the business, the way we combine the elements of the business? And then how do we create accountability in that so that at the end of the day, we are building businesses that are sustainable into the future? So we've taken the scenarios, the multiple horizons that we've spoken about. We've looked and examined where we are at the moment in the present that we've looked at. We've looked at the pathways, tested assumptions, expectations, looked for accelerators, inhibitors. We've broken that down into a project plan, the red blocks, and we've given the project plan to different people to actually be accountable for. And part of that accountability is obviously getting the reporting and the disclosure. And ultimately, it's working in two key areas in our business, because when we build a business, whether it's from scratch or whether it's having to reimagine it as we go through this kind of crisis, we've got to think about performance in our business. Where does it come from? And the performance in our business comes from the right combination of systems and of people. And right now that is being challenged. Some of the challenge is on the systems we have available, because they've been built with a different context, a different environment, a different way of working in mind. And so we have to question our systems and ask, where do we build the variety in the systems? Where do we take into account the new levels of challenge in our systems? Our people are also going to be challenged. So I believe very strongly that if we let people step up, I'm an encourager of getting people to engage, asking the tough questions, because I do think that people are themselves processing and thinking through lots of things. And if we can get our people involved in answering some of the questions, I think we'll be amazed at some of those options. And we've got to ask ourselves in this time, what parts of our business do we actually need to change fundamentally? What parts of our business do we need to strengthen and build? Because some parts of our business, what we don't want to do when you're in a storm in a ship, you don't want to abandon ship immediately, okay? You want to actually support the ship. And I think that some of us, our ships are going to change and the metaphor falls apart because we have to rebuild our ships, some of us in this time. But we're going to rebuild based on the strongest parts of our business, or by identifying the areas that we need to strengthen in order to move forward. And that's the whole idea of strategic thinking this time. It's not so much about the nice big fancy vision at the end of the day, but it's about this being an iterative process as well. And what we need to do is we need to loop this process regularly into our decision-making cycle or into our meeting cycle. When we've spelt it out, we need to be revisiting the scenarios. As we approach our 6-month, 9-month horizon, we need to be doing another 6-month, 9-month horizon. Our assumptions we need to continually be testing. The actions and the accountability, learning from our people as they move forward. And then continually, looking out for opportunities as we move forward. Because as I mentioned right at the beginning, it is about ultimately reimagining where we are going into the future and building that reimagining into our leadership cycles. And so with that in mind, any thoughts, questions, comments? And I left a bit of time either for some of the panelists. I'd love to hear what some of the panelists have thought about that. As I said, it's a slightly different approach in this time. A Friday is a good time, even though for some of us we lose sight of the track of the weeks, but to really step back and say, let's think about our businesses more strategically as well.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I was wondering if I can debate one aspect.
You can, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's you spent some time on technology and pivoting and the fact that we have to pivot in this environment. What I'm going to put to you is that the pivoting would have been required in any event because of exponential technology. So what's happened is the required pivoting has in fact suddenly become necessary now and urgently necessary, whereas it was going to take, let's say, 10 years was the exponential concerns in relation to job losses and what have you. And I'm going so far as to say that even the travel industry was at huge risk when it comes to technology. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you before I ask that you comment. I'm going to ask that you stop sharing your screen so that I can.
Okay. Go for it.
Let's have a look here if I can find it. Just bear with me.
Pivot's the right thing. Is to say that technology is one of the aspects, but definitely not the only one. I know the network is not that great. Hopefully, it's not from my side.
Okay, so have a look here. Yeah, you broke up there. Can you see that? So this is an example of technology. Yeah, so this is an example of technology that a commercial airline has already invested in. It's a program by them. So this is a Japanese airline that's saying, we're going to have robots, we're going to have avatars, individuals are going to be able to travel around the world without standing in queues. So the travel industry was always under threat and had to reinvent itself. Now the travel industry has to, these companies have to reinvent themselves urgently. So what I'm saying is I like looking at things, the glass is half full. This was going to happen anyway. We have to reinvent ourselves anyway. And, you know, in fact, at Schindler's, we reinvented ourselves because of exponential technology. As an example, conveyancing. Conveyancing is not going to be around in 10 years' time because it can be, blockchain can be used. You'll be able to transfer a property at a supermarket. So I just wanted your thinking around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, so remember I mentioned that some of the challenges we're seeing unfold are simply because businesses have been in trouble. Okay. And it's catalyzed a whole lot of thinking. I mean, part of it has been that I think the climate crisis that we're going in is being really, there's a catalyzing effect in terms of having to look at the way that we do things in our businesses. And so absolutely. And I think we need to step back and look at everything in our businesses to try to make sense of the way forward. And it means looking at things in a completely different way than we have before.
How are you guys looking at the issue of exponential technology prior to COVID and the challenges that businesses had with a 10-year forecast in mind?
So my view is that ultimately technology is a tool, and it's for some businesses it's a leverage point. It's an incredible, without a doubt. I mean, we use the technology all the time, but I'm wary of getting completely, rosy-eyed about the technology. And so I'm maybe a bit of a skeptic, I think, because we promote that in the boardroom. We promote the fact that when we're looking at opportunities, we need to be not critical, but skeptical. And I think this is an opportunity to re-look at some of these things that have promised a whole lot of things and say, well, maybe they could do something else. They are going to have to be deployed in completely different ways because the nature of the way people are going to interact is going to change. I mean, I saw an article the other day, are we ever going to shake hands again? I don't know. well, not without some sanitizer, okay? But I mean, silly, simple things like that are changing the way, and each of our businesses is positioned. Let me take a step back. All of our businesses can do some things well. And I'm sure that if we apply the right thinking to what we do well, and that's a combination of our technology, our people, our systems, our history, we can unlock, I believe, huge value. I am an optimist. I look at the world around me and I say, it's crazy, but we've got to look through it. And that's why we've used the phrase through, because it is a through thing. It's not an end point. The world isn't ending. We're going through something. But what emerges on the other side will look very different to what was at the beginning. And the only way, so I often say to boards when they're in, even before this crisis, is every single system we have, so even the law that you work with far more closely than I do, someone thought about it. It all originated in people's thinking. As the world changed and morphed and moved, legal systems were people's thinking. This concept of the legal person of a company that we now want to rescue. Why? Because it's a legal person. We can't just let it die. So that's my thinking. I'm maybe a little bit out there on some of those, but I think it's really important to take a step back and examine our thinking during this time.
So this is what I've taken from your message. I mean, this is basically it. To sum up. reimagine yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but in doing so, make sure that you stick to something that you do well.
Yeah.
And I
build
think
on your capabilities which underlie or undergird your current products and services. Okay. And I think especially in the short term, because the danger is we start pursuing things that our neighbor's doing well or someone else is doing well. But actually, I think the opportunities, the thing we can do best is what we know what to do. And that's the combination of our team, if that makes sense.
yeah. Well, on the reimagination point, how would you suggest one does reimagine? Does one scrap the existing business model, ignore it completely and start from the ground up? How would you go about it?
I probably wouldn't scrap much. I would ask the question, what do we need to keep going? Especially if there are things in our business that are moving, we need to rely on that. And it's a case of stepping. So it's activating the thinking. So what I often do is I often just ask a series of questions to a team over a period of time, and start just asking. That's why I use that tool called the business model canvas, because a good way to think about it, instead of maybe scrapping the whole thing, is to say which area of our business can we focus on and really think through deeply in the next 2 weeks. All right. So a team saying, well, so those businesses that were right up until the beginning of the crisis dependent on a walk-in channel, that channel has to be rethought. And it may not be just online. You know, I've seen shops open up in some of the countries that are opening up where they've put a counter at their front door, okay? And then they've got an app that people order their stuff on. They've got a little sign that says order on the app, and then someone in the store collects it, and so there's just a simpler interaction. There are loads of ways of doing it. We're limited by our thinking at this time.
Yeah, I think it would be good also now in the context of business rescue. You know, whilst the rethinking is taking place in relation to what you do well, businesses are going to need a reprieve, and that's where COBRA also comes in. And
yep,
that's what
absolutely.
I think it's important to mention. That what happens is the CIDR group plug in, but the reprieve that's needed for you guys, the time that's needed for you guys to assist in the reimagination, is afforded to via COBRA. So it's a nice example as to how COBRA would work. Moratorium kicks in if creditors are unreasonable. Now it moves over to the plan, and you guys start working on the plan with the creditors. And it's essentially the plan is a reimagination, as you put it.
Absolutely, and I think that ties it again. That pause button, and I think that's the great thing about business rescue is it affords a pause button. But which is
what's happened with ComAir now, because ComAir
exactly.
is factually solvent, but commercially insolvent because they can't pay their debts as and when they fall due. So they need that breathing space. And then the likes of you guys would come in and assist in the reimagination. Maybe go the Avatar route. Recommend that to ComAir.
Absolutely. If they've got enough money to invest in that, the problem with technology is expensive. Absolutely. So thanks for this opportunity. I think if there are any other questions or comments from the panelists, but I think this is the kind of conversation we need to be having. I'm also a fan of starting think tanks in your business. Those of you who set up a think tank with maybe not just the guys who you always talk to. Get your junior guys in the room and say, it will be a virtual room at the moment, and say, this is the question, how do we answer it? Even with you, Maurice, what is legal? What is a legal practice going to look like going forward? I mean, it's a professional service as we are, so it's got significant advantages during this time. But how are people going to be buying legal services? I don't know. You're going to have to think about that. All right. So what I'm good at doing, what I'm doing is I'm good at asking lots of tough questions, and that's one of the things I do well.
Well, I look forward to having a discussion with you offline on that score, because I've got a lot of ideas, I've got a lot of thinking, and a lot of projects underway just to address that particular issue. I just want to mention, you said think tank, and again, I just want to mention COBRA. As part of the pro bono service, we can actually set up those think tanks with your team if you need the business rescue plugin, so you can understand. You can move with your team on the reimagination, and then have us as COBRA plug in. We'll explain to the team how we can get that moratorium, give you that breathing space, And that's pro bono. So, I mean, it begs the question, why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
So it is, and then we can plug in the likes of the Siddar Group, other professionals who can then give their views as to how to assist. That's what COBRA is there for.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why we're part of it, because this is through. COBRA is a tool to help you get through it. And what it looks like on the other side, we'll get together sometime in the same room and celebrate somehow.
I'm really, really grateful to you, Roger. I'm grateful to the panelists. Thanks so much. To the audience, thanks for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you go onto the COBRA website, www.cobra.org.za, the webinars next week, targeted webinars, are very, very interesting. So check those out, please. If you want to set up those Zoom sessions, please write to info@cobra.org.za and we'll set those up for you. Or you can find us on the internet, email me personally. I'll respond as quickly as I can. So thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. Until this afternoon, in fact, there's a webinar this afternoon. Please join at 3 o'clock. Have a look at the COBRA page for further details. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.